Mirror on the wall. Let them see me after all. Hello, everyone. I am your not so evil queen, Joshua Waters, the host of Rotten to the Core. I have decided to start attempting to add video to my podcast. Bear with me as I learn, because your queen is not a tech guru by any way, shape, or form. I've always been a fan of nature more than technology. On my podcast, I record and send it to our audio guru, Brent, to work his magic. I do go off of a script because, as smart as I like to think I am, the memory is not as good as it used to be. Now, let's grab those lanterns and let's get going. Do I have a lesson for you today? Disclaimer: this episode will go into the extent of life in concentration camps during the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler. There will be strong feelings in this episode, and I'm so sorry to everyone involved, living and dead, who had to suffer for just being themselves. I go into this with the most humble respect for the victims and families who still suffer repercussions. If this topic is triggering to you, please enjoy one of my other podcasts, and I wish you healing and love. I hope the new year is treating you well so far. Are those resolutions still going strong, or were they over before they even began? I like to do things I believe I will be successful at versus setting myself up for failure in the new year with resolutions I can stick with. I set my intentions, say them, and let the universe do what is in my best interest. You guys have been sharing some of your own lives with me, and each and every time it makes my day immeasurably better. I now get to talk to people from all around our planet. Jill, that blouse you made is amazing. Thank you for sharing your artwork with me. I did finish that kimono I was making for my godson, but I am nowhere near your talent, my dear. If you enjoy Rotten to the Core, go and follow me on Instagram. It's Rotten to the Core. I'm starting to share a little bit more of my personal life and my little fur baby, the Chihuahua known as Anastasia Beaverhausen. Speaking of a little furry creature, that brings me to our rotten man of no honor today. He is a man everyone has learned about, or so I thought. Of course, when I started this podcast about rotten people in history, he was one of my first thoughts. I decided not to cover him because I thought we had all learned our lessons. But after seeing and hearing all of the support that a certain failed shoe salesman, Yi Ha, has received for his anti-Semitic comments, opinions, and thoughts, I feel that it is crucial now more than ever to educate and erase any possibility of history repeating itself. I can't do much on the scale of the whole world, but I can educate and use my voice to help end any kind of adoration and denial of this monster. This is episode 26 of Rotten to the Core, and our topic today, Adolf Hitler. We will be refreshing what we know and maybe discover something new about one of the worst humans to ever exist. We are going down deep into history to learn every detail about this monster as we can. I will be using a little humor as always, but just about him, not of his crimes. Even in my early research, I became quite emotional, and if I didn't use some humor, I wouldn't make it through this without tears and snot hindering my ability to speak. The only disrespect I have is towards him and those who helped him. Some even claim that none of it ever even happened. And to those individuals, I say, you should be ashamed of yourself, your parents, grandparents, and really anyone who had a hand in your rearing. And From the words of my own grandmother, you're a putwipe. Fun fact that I did discover when I began my research, Hitler only had one testicle and what was described as a grotesquely underdeveloped penis that had a second hole at the base that would often leak urine. He was also a fan of having an incestuous relationship with his niece that involved some water sports. We will start at the beginning and learn about the boy who would grow into a deadly dictator responsible for the murder of approximately 6 million Jews and at least 5 million Soviet prisoners of war, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and other victims. To give some of a visual of the sheer number of people murdered, I live in Indiana, where the entire population of our state is 6.8 million people. He murdered an entire state worth and more of mothers, fathers, children, and grandparents. Those who could make it out of the camps alive suffered from numerous mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual trauma for the rest of their lives. I want to know, as always, how someone like him could not only do what he did, but also show that just maybe some people are born to be rotten. The little wretch was born in the spring of April 20th, 1889 in Braunau, Austria, which is a town in Upper Austria on the border with Germany. Hitler's father, a local customs official, was illegitimate. For a time, he bore his mother's name, Schicklgruber, but by 1876, he had established his family claim to the surname Hitler. Hitler's father was harsh and distant. He had a close relationship with his mother, but her death from cancer when he was 17 was traumatic for him. Hitler had a standard education, and he didn't excel in any field of study. As a young man, he showed no special talents, and he wanted to study art in Vienna after his mother's death in hopes of being accepted to an art school. But he was turned down for lack of talent. Did you know that when Hitler was 4 in 1894, he fell into a frozen river and was saved by another boy? The one who saved him grew up to be a prominent priest and organist for the Catholic Church, Father Kieberger. Can you imagine how much history would be different? I definitely understand why he would help a young boy drowning, but good gravy. I wonder if the priest ever regretted his decision later on in life. It isn't sure where or when Adolf's anti-Semitic opinions began. Prejudice against Jews was widespread in the early 20th century, but there's no evidence that Hitler's family was particularly anti-Semitic. He himself claimed that it began during his time in Vienna. On the other hand, Hitler was a regular visitor in at least one Jewish family's home, and his efforts to support himself by selling paintings were made possible primarily by Jewish art dealers. Although he was technically an Austrian citizen, Hitler volunteered to serve in the German army at the start of World War I. He greeted the war with enthusiasm as a great relief from the frustration and aimlessness of civilian life. He did previously attempt to join the Austrian army, but was again rejected for being inadequate. He served through all 4 years of the conflict, although he only made it to the rank of corporal, the lowest ranking non-commissioned officer. In 1919, there was a short-lived attempt to create a communist government in Germany. Enemies of the communists pointed to the role of a few Jews in this movement and labeled communism a Jewish conspiracy. Modern scholars tend to see these years, rather than the Vienna period, as the time when Hitler's ideas about Jews became fixed. He even wrote for the removal of Jews from Germany and a government of national strength. After the war, Hitler lived in Munich, a city filled with ex-soldiers and others angry at the new democratic government in Berlin. He didn't have any prospects for the future, no family or money, and soon he began to associate with some of the many groups formed to agitate against all the, in their view, evils affecting Germany. Capitalism, communism, the unpopular Treaty of Versailles, democracy, and the Jews. This was when he began to make a name for himself, thanks partly to his public speaking ability. Proof that the power behind our words and how we use our voices impacts the world more than we might realize. Even if it is unknown to you, there is power in the words that we choose. The phrase, "the dogs with the loudest barks are the ones that are most afraid," came to mind. The danger of, let's say, unremarkable men in positions of power is a feeling I know all too well, being an American. In 1924, after a failed coup attempt, Adolf was arrested and imprisoned in Landsberg after being convicted of treason following the Biederhall Putsch in Munich the previous year. During his imprisonment, he was gifted a typewriter, and with the help of his deputy, Rudolf Hess, the book Mein Kampf was birthed. Here in the United States, it can be found at many community libraries and can be bought, sold, and traded in bookshops as the First Amendment protects it to the United States Constitution's freedom of speech and freedom of the press clauses. As a German copyright law, the entire text entered the public domain on January 1st, 2016, 70 years after Hitler's death. It is debated on having it available for people to read, but I think it might be a good way to understand just how stinking rotten this man truly was. I mean, I'm not reading it, and if someone does, make sure it's for education, not inspiration. Now, a Boston-based publisher is making sure the infamous manifesto actually does some good in the world. According to the Boston Globe, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt has published it since 1933 and began donating proceeds from the book to charities in the year 2000. I guess better late than never? In December 1924, Hitler was released from prison, more popular than ever. Get better heroes, people. Lord. He returned to Munich and started his plans of taking over Germany. He now realized it had been premature to attempt to overthrow the democratic government by force with the support of the German army and other established institutions. He was determined not to make that mistake again. Now, no matter how much his Nazi Party members wanted action taken against the young German Democratic Republic, it simply would not happen. He would not give in to them as he had done in November 1923 with disastrous and even laughable results. A direct quote from him while he was in prison says, "Instead of working to achieve power by an armed coup, we shall have to hold our noses and enter the Reichstag against the Catholic and Marxist deputies. If outvoting them takes longer than outshooting them, at least the results will be guaranteed by their own constitution. Any law process is slow, but sooner or later we shall have a majority, and after that, Germany." The Nazi Party was organized as a government, and Hitler counted on being able to slide into power when the democracy failed. The full name of the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Its members were often called Nazis, and the Nazis were radically right-wing, anti-Semitic, anti-communist, and anti-democratic. There is a less successful similar group here in the United States today. They call themselves the Proud Boys and are an American far-right neo-fascist and exclusively male organization that promotes and engages in political violence here in the United States. They are nowhere near the power that the Nazis had, but there are too many similarities to ignore. We get it, boys. You're scared. But just go back to your cousin wives and leave us alone. On February 27th, 1925, the Nazis held their first big meeting since the Beer Hall Putsch, in which Hitler reclaimed his position as the absolute leader of the Nazi Party. But during his 2-hour-long speech, 4,000 cheering Nazis were there, and Hitler got carried away and started spewing out the same old threats against the Democratic Republic, Marxists, and Jews. Germany now had a new president, and as they called him, a sleepy-eyed older gentleman named Paul von Hindenburg, who was a famous World War I field marshal. He was unanimously backed by the conservative and middle-of-the-road political parties to help bring stability to the Republic and to thwart any attempt by radical parties to capture the presidency. So, okay, when I found that out, it really gave me chills. I mean, two similar people. As things got better economically, there was a sense of relaxation among the German people. Since they didn't have to struggle so much for daily existence, they had time for enjoyment, like outdoor recreation, the arts, and sitting around, drinking beer, and hanging out at cafes. Among these people, the name Adolf Hitler was likely to bring a smile to people's faces, perhaps getting him a bit confused with the great film comedian Charlie Chaplin, which is episode 6 of Rotten to the Core, who looked like him and even had similar body language. Amid all of this, Adolf Hitler knew that it was going to be slow going for his party, which had counted on so many unhappy, disgruntled men among its early members. But Hitler also had a sense that the good times would not last. The German Republic was living on borrowed money and borrowed time. The underlying political and racial tensions he was so keen to exploit were still there, only dormant. And when the good times were over, they would once again come looking for him. And they did. In 1933, Hitler achieved his vision and rose to be the dictator of Germany and leader of the Nazi Party. Following a series of electoral victories, he ruled absolutely until his death by suicide on April 30th, 1945, and World War II would officially end in September of that same year. Under Hitler's leadership and racist ideology, the Nazi regime was responsible for the genocide of close to 6 million Jews and millions of other victims whom he and his followers deemed Untermenschen, or subhuman. Hitler and the Nazi regime were also responsible for killing an estimated 19.3 million civilians and prisoners of war. I can only imagine what it must have been like for those poor people. I am not Jewish, but I have far too much experience being called and viewed as an abomination by others just for being who I am. In addition to all of those deaths, 28.7 million soldiers and civilians died as a result of military action in Europe. The number of civilians killed during World War II was unprecedented in all previous warfare, and the casualties constituted the deadliest conflict in all of history. The first concentration camp in the Nazi system, Dachau, opened in March 1933. By the end of World War II, the Nazis administered a massive system of more than 40,000 camps that stretched across Europe from the French-Spanish border into the conquered Soviet territories and as far south as Greece and North Africa. The most significant number of prisoners were Jews, but individuals were arrested and imprisoned for a variety of reasons, including ethnicity and political affiliation. Prisoners were subjected to unimaginable terrors. From the moment they arrived at the camps, usually by train, it was a dehumanizing existence that involved a struggle for survival, all against a system designed to annihilate them all. Living conditions were poor because the SS believed that prisoners deserved no better. Before the war, the SS still provided a bare minimum, but during the war, conditions became deadlier. Prisoners slept in broken down barracks with leaking roofs, and they were crammed into tiny bunks, often without blankets, or directly onto muddy floors. Some prisoners had to sleep in flimsy tents or damp tunnels even. Rations were cut, causing mass starvation. Hunger and disease turned many prisoners into living skeletons. Seriously ill prisoners had little hope of survival, and camp hospitals offered hardly any medical treatment. Instead, sick inmates were routinely executed or deported to die in other camps. They performed horrendous medical experiments on them, especially twins, with no anesthesia, and separated mothers from their children. Executions were far too familiar with guns and gas chambers being utilized to do them. If you study history enough, you'll already know how easy it can be for it to repeat itself. Even today in 2023, there are too many similarities between him and the vision he had for the future. A vision of division, superiority, and death. So, do not stay silent when you see something. Speak up, stand up, and refuse to allow our world to fall prey to anything that echoes that time in history. I do hope that this episode has taught you something about how easy it is to let evil people take power. All it takes is simply not doing anything about it. I know most civilized humans have learned not to repeat history, but this is for anyone who may have any doubts about the atrocities that Adolf Hitler did commit. At the end of the day, we are all one species trying to live, love, and grow on this little tiny blue marble floating through space. So give love as much as possible and focus on the person instead of the label you might have given them. Thank you for listening to me on this challenging but ever necessary episode. I hope you all have all the love that you can contain and share it with someone else who might need it. Love and light to you all, and I will talk to you next time on Rotten to the Core. Available anywhere you listen to podcasts and YouTube. Peace be with you all.